I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, January 21st, 2019. Clerk, call the roll, please.
Mayor Berman,
Here.
Trustee Cofino,
Here.
Trustee Lowry,
Here.
Trustee Curtis, here. Trustee Carroll,
Here.
Trustee Martinez,
Here.
and Trustee Gately.
Here.
Any audience comments at this time? Trustee comments? Discussion, item number one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr.
The first item on the Committee of the Whole meeting tonight is the reimbursement for the soil removal at 24 South Lincoln Way, which is the former gas station which was purchased recently, and now we have the Mocha Coffee Shop going up. The property owner is requesting $39,997 for the testing and the removal of the contaminated soil that was on site. This occurred October. There was discovered that there was some soil smelling petroleum. The property owner came in, just brought to staff's attention. We were told to keep on any receipts that were associated with the testing and the removal of the soils. The soil was tested and soils were removed. All the information is included in the report here, including invoices. Myself and the property owner are here tonight to answer any questions you might have. And if this would be favorable, we bring it back to the next meeting with the resolution for approval.
Can you walk me through the process after we had the building torn down? We do any phase one or phase two, or we had info from the state saying a lot was clear or clean?
Yeah, there was a no further remediation letter. It was issued on April 17, 2015, which indicated there was no further cleanup necessary. We demolished the site, I think it was, we purchased in February of 16, so the no further remediation letter came prior to that. We assumed the property, we demolished the gas station, we removed there were 2 underground storage tanks in the northeast corner of the property. Those tanks were removed. They were newer tanks, and then the soil was tested by the demolition company around the actual tanks themselves. And then we got clearance from the fire marshal. But it was a different portion of the property upon excavation of the actual building site where they were down near bedrock that they encountered the contaminated soils. And at that point in time, they were tested, deemed contaminated. They were taken to a site that could accept that sort of soils that were basically what I'm seeing in the invoice is soils that were contaminated by underground storage tanks.
But the EPA came in prior to us buying it, right? Wasn't it certified as being clean as well?
Yeah, as part of the no further remediation letter, there was a corrective action plan that was submitted by the engineer that was working on the site with the previous property owners when it was in the trust. It was cleaned up. There were certain measures taken to the site. I believe it was peroxide was used to help remove contaminants. There were, appurtenances that were cleared on the property. The only land use limitations that were had by the no further remediation letter was a prohibition of groundwater usage, which was passed by the village shortly thereafter. It was before we even, I think before we even purchased the property. So the only use limitations on the property were the fact that no one could use, put a well on the site, which is obviously.
So did the owner do a phase one upon?
Well, we knew the. I don't know if there was anything done, but we actually had gone through the exercise with the property. It was not. I'm not sure. Had you done any previous testing before purchasing the property, Scott?
No, the letter we had from the state gave us every indication that it was clean.
Did we advertise it as being clean?
Yes. Well, we advertised it with the information that we had.
Yeah.
So all the information was given to the property owner. It's a recorded document, so it's passed through. So we knew that there was a clean bill of health on the property. And no further remediation doesn't always mean that there has to be soils that are removed or soils that are contamination is always present. The no further remediation letter basically insinuates that if there is contaminated soils present, that it be handled in a certain manner. In this case, it was removed from the site. It doesn't always have to be. It could be entombed, but in order to clean the site up, it was in the best interest for everyone to get that off the site.
Do we have any
Well, I think-
recourse against the company that removed the storage tanks and did the testing on our behalf?
Well, when the soil was tested, the tanks were removed. For whatever reason, the soils were not tested at the time of removal. I actually witnessed the tank removal personally, but for whatever reason, the soils were not tested at that time, so the contractor that demolished the property had to come back and test the soils around the storage tanks were on the northeast corner, not on the portion of the site where these soils were found, around the foundation of the building, installing the private infrastructure on it would be the central and then would be the southwest corner of the property. The recourse would have been, I mean, the previous owner was a trust that we had purchased the property from that were deceased, and we had the no further remediation letter previous to purchasing the property.
As I recall, it was like many years that that property was just kind of in limbo with the EPA. And they were
Correct.
testing, and it was just constantly a problem from, day one, since I've been around.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, and
Well, they must not have gone down to bedrock in their.
Correct.
In their original work.
it's gotta be clean, and we want a clean
Well,
village.
it's clean now. The most
yeah.
important thing is when's the opening?
Yeah, and again, I did put it in the memo, but the reimbursement would be through the TIF fund itself, so.
Yeah, I'm
Which
fine.
TIF statutorily would apply to removal of contaminated soils and contaminants on a property. That's what it's intended for.
I'm in favor of it.
Yes.
So at this point, do we have an environmental phase 2 or just phase 1?
No, at this point it would be done. I mean, we're at a point where this property is probably as clean as it's ever been.
Okay.
Between the removal of the storage tanks by us and removal of the contaminated soils by the current property owner upon improvement of the property and construction.
They did 48 borings, I think, on this test, all over the whole property, took out everything.
Clean.
Also, best of my knowledge, should be, I can imagine that they went pretty deep. Yeah.
I'm in favor of reimbursing them through the
Okay.
tips.
Very
Thank you.
much so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, very good. Yeah, I think the community is really waiting for an opening, so, very good.
Looking good. Nice looking building.
Looking very good. Happy to see it, and we wish you the best, that's for sure, yeah. Any other discussion on the reimbursement? And Steve, you got enough information?
Thank you for your feedback.
Item number 2, mid-year financial update.
Thank you. There's a short PowerPoint presentation on this item. So if your screens are not on in front of you right now, it should be popping up. Every year right now we do a brief update to the board about the village's financial condition. We started our budget process last month. We anticipate bringing a status update on that process to the Government Operations Committee on March 5th. And we anticipate committee of the whole discussion on the official draft budget on April 2nd. So I'm going to go through a 10,000 foot overview of some highlights so far this year. And if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to stop me and ask.
Our screens are still not on.
You're not on? There's a power button on your side.
The power's on, but it's still blue screen.
With no signal. Yeah.
You haven't lately. They did it first. I can't get my cow packet on this. What the heck's that about?
One. That's pulled out, we need to secure that differently.
There you go.
Thank you, that's good. That's good, we got the big one in.
Thanks, Bill.
That'll work.
First class.
All right. So some of it might be hard to follow, but I'll do the best to explain. We have a balanced budget passed for the current fiscal year. In the last 4 fiscal years, we've had positive surpluses in our general fund. As you can see, the numbers down below there. These are after we've allocated one-time funds for pension contributions and various capital projects. We continue to maintain a 68% reserve level in our general fund. We've done that the last 2 years in a row. And we're still maintaining our AA+ bond rating. So going over our general fund first, as you can see that we have a general fund revenues and expenditures of just over 11 million. Balanced budget for the current fiscal year. Our budget for the general fund includes sales tax revenue comprises 43%, income tax revenue 15%, property tax revenue 19%. And as you can see with our expenditures comprise about 50% for police, 18% public works, and 18% village hall and other governmental functions. Couple notes on sales tax revenue. Sales tax revenue is up 1.2% for the first 6 months of the year. Sales of vehicles are doing pretty well. We've seen a little bit decline in gas prices, which affects sales tax revenue. We have a mix of new businesses opening. We do have some retail closings due to increased online shopping. I'll talk a little bit about the use tax shift as more people shop online. We're seeing greater and greater increases in our use tax revenue distributed by the state to kind of make up and compensate for that. Our current baseline projection is sales tax is going to remain relatively about the same right now at 0.2% more than last year, about $4.718 million versus a budget of $4,750,000. Looking at some of the numbers, this may be kind of hard to see without the little screens, but essentially we have a lot of variations month to month with sales tax revenue, but we are anticipating some of that to be relatively flat for the rest of the current fiscal year. Last year we received $4,711,000 in sales tax revenue, and this year we anticipate around $4.718 million, just under budget, about $4,750,000. Talking about income tax revenue a little bit. Income tax revenue is up 10.5% for the first 8 months of our fiscal year. The state budget decreased our LGDF distributions by 5% in July, but this was actually an increase, as the prior year there was a decrease of 10%. So some of that 10% increase is because of that 5% sort of increase in distributions from the prior year. Income tax revenue is really hard to project and predict. It varies a lot month to month. There's a lot of changes from the state tax law changes, tax code, and Illinois Department of Revenue accounting changes as well. Our current projection of 8.5% more than last year, which is $1.721 million, versus a budget of $1,660,000. And this is something that we will continue to monitor going forward. You can kind of see some of the year-over-year changes on a month-to-month basis. We've had some very significant increases year-over-year earlier in the year. We're starting to see that peter off a little bit, but we are anticipating being about $60,000 over budget for the income tax revenue versus what we budgeted for the year. Just a couple of quick notes on property tax revenue. As you can see here, this is our extensions over the last several years. As we've talked about frequently, we've seen a decrease in property tax revenue remaining in the general fund, that red line, and an increased allocation needed for our statutorily required police pension contributions. So you see here the 2017 extension of $1,101,000. We're actually seeing a decrease next year. That's for our current fiscal year. We're seeing a decrease next year of about $90,000. That's remaining in the general fund after police pension allocations. Fortunately, we're seeing some increases in other revenue sources to make that up. And as a reminder, this is the levy where we are giving up the CPI increase, and we had a levy of $2,450,000 that we will collect in the next fiscal year. CPI continues to remain about 2%. We just got notice that it was 1.9% during the recent calendar year. So again, that 2% annual increase seems to be a pretty steady number. Talking about building permits a little bit. To date, we've received $421,000 in building permits versus a budget of $260,000. We had significant one-time permits throughout the year for hail damage, for roof repair, siding. We had a couple industrial build-outs permits that we're taking out. So we do have an increase in these sort of one-time revenues that we talk about throughout the year, that we come up with a plan for allocating those either for capital projects, maybe additional police pension contribution, or other one-time purposes via budget amendments. So that is something we anticipate bringing to committee and board for discussion later in the spring. And we may even look at some of these allocations and doing it on a prospective basis based on how the budget process shakes out over the next 2 months. So overall, so far, overall good, good year-to-date revenues versus budget so far for the year. A couple other notes, just want to highlight our use tax revenue. That is where the revenues are distributed on a per capita basis by the state from online retailers. We're seeing continued significant increases in use tax revenue, which is somewhat making up for the slowdown in increases of sales tax revenue. So between the two revenue sources combined, things are coming in pretty well, anticipating about a 9.3% increase over last year. Video gaming also continues to increase. It's starting to slow down on those increases a little bit. We anticipate about a 4.3% increase in the current year to 95,000.
Yeah, just on that gaming, so it's 95,000 our cut? It's hard for me to read.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yes, that's $95,000 video gaming taxes coming in for this current fiscal year. Our telecommunications tax, as the board is aware, we did a temporary 2-year reallocation of that to the general fund, which is why we're anticipating receiving $144,000 to the general fund versus $57,000 last year. And that temporary 2-year reallocation between the general fund and the capital projects fund goes back to the way it was after the end of 2020.
Hey, Bill.
yeah.
The video gaming tax,
Yeah.
does that include the OTB or the?
No, that's a good point. The OTB is a separate. So the off-track betting taxes that we began receiving again with the turf room, that's probably about $40,000 to $50,000 a year.
I have a question about the telecommunications tax.
Yes.
Why is 1819 budgeted 149% above prior year?
Because for this year's budget, remember, if you recall, we reallocated our 4% telecommunications tax. It used to be 1% in the general fund and 3% in the capital projects fund. And so we reallocated it to be 2.5% in the general fund and 1.5% in the capital projects fund for a 2-year period to try and address certain initiatives in the general fund.
Thank you.
So cable franchise revenues, we're looking at possibly a 6% increase in those revenues to $300,000. Our investment income continues to increase due to increases in interest rates and federal funds rates. So we're looking at about $165,000 in that revenue source versus $120,000. Total fines and forfeits, I mentioned that there. That includes the police admin towing fees, circuit court fines, local ordinance violations. Those types of fines and forfeits increased significantly last year to $182,000, primarily due to the admin towing fees that were received. And projected this year, $250,000. There's probably some additional change to that was going to take place over the next several months as we see what some of these newer revenue sources and how they're coming in look at. Oops. So overall, other revenues are up or down slightly from the prior year. We've got general fund revenues budgeted $11,070,000. Our baseline projection right now is about $11,400,000. So overall, we're seeing revenues come in a little bit stronger than budgeted for the current year. We're going to still have a cautious outlook going forward for sales tax revenue and LGDF. It's anticipated that we'll have some significant development permit fees over the next couple of years due to Lincoln Valley on the Fox and some other development sites. There's some uncertainty right now with the overall continued economic expansion, so that's something we're going to be monitoring. I think we're in the 9th year right now of that economic expansion, so being mindful of what may or may not come up over the horizon as we go through the budget process. Just a couple of notes on expenditures. A lot of our personnel expenditures we've got greater certainty on now that we have finalized collective bargaining agreements with our unions, and so we know what those variances are going to be. We're anticipating being under budget with contractual services, consultant fees, repair costs at this point in time. We just completed our first full year with the IPPC, which is our health insurance cooperative for all employees. That's turned out to be really, really good. We're looking at an annual increase next year of only 1% to 4% in our health insurance costs, and that's minimal cost savings to the employee and the village. That's turned out really good. Normally, our variances are about 2% to 3% under budget. It's really kind of hard to predict at this time, but on a conservative method, we are anticipating probably being about $300,000 to the positive in the current fiscal year for the general fund. That'll probably change over the next several weeks as we go through the budget process, and we'll be discussing what additional actions we might be able to take with those variances during that time. Moving on from the general fund, just a reminder about our MFT fund. Revenues are about 1.6% higher than last year, estimated to be about $475,000 in total. We use this for road salt, crack filling repair, streetlight electricity, and repair. That's the primary expenditures that come out of the MFT fund. This is the second year that we're using MFT reserves to fund the LED changeover of our streetlights and poles. This is the second year of that program, and we're estimated to be fully converted to LED by 2020. We are anticipating to have about $875,000 left in our MFT fund at the end of the current year. That reserve can be used as funding for a road program, especially when you have a road program that's let and bid by the state and the village has to pay a contribution towards it, like we just did with the airport, ice cream, and Alder project. Just a couple notes in our TIF fund. Route 31, we had $493,000 increment in the current fiscal year. The Marvo John parking lot project estimated to be complete for about roughly $300,000 in the current fiscal year, so that was funded out of TIF fund. We have roughly $120,000 of expenses projected for reimbursement studies and various grants. The silo refurbishing project likely will be carried over to next budget year. But again, that was going to be partially funded out of the TIF fund and partially with a possible grant. Our reserve was approximately $1.5 million at the beginning of the year. We're anticipating that it would be likely about the same level at the end of the current fiscal year, with the 7 years remaining life on that TIF. A couple of notes on our capital projects fund. This funds our annual road program and various other capital projects. We have base revenues in this fund that we receive every year, about $1.65 million. Roughly $1,050,000 of that comes from our 0.5% non-home rule sales tax revenue. We anticipate that revenue, like sales tax in the general fund, being roughly flat, not a lot of increases in next fiscal year. You can see we're projecting our electricity tax, our gas utility tax, being roughly about the same, maybe some slight decreases. The telecommunications tax going down due to the reallocation with the general fund. So our capital projects fund started the year with roughly $3 million in restricted fund balances. Typically, these funds are used to annual road program and various other capital projects. We receive roughly $250,000 additionally, in addition to the $1.65 million on an annual basis. So our estimated 2018 road program was roughly $2 million. We also take into account various other capital projects that need to be funded out of this fund, including village facilities, sidewalks, right-of-way improvements such as signs, and various other miscellaneous capital projects. We had a riverfront park improvements budgeted, $175,000 construction, likely to be rebudgeted next year. So we're likely in the year around $2.2 million in reserves for the capital projects fund. We like to have about $1.2 to $1.5 million at a minimum to try and account for unanticipated capital projects that come up from time to time and to meet our cash flow demands as we do our annual road program. Our road program next year is roughly about $1.6 million. I know some of that's under discussion that might be tweaked going forward, and there's various other capital projects being talked about to be funded out of that fund next fiscal year. Just a quick note on our water fund. Our water charges are up 3.8% for the current fiscal year. This is due to the 4% rate increase that was effective June 1st. As the board recalls, this was offset by a sanitary sewer rate decrease of a greater amount to minimize the impact of the rate increase. When we analyze our revenues here, we're still seeing conservative water use, people trending towards more efficient fixtures and conservation. We received $96,000 in water connection fees in the current fiscal year. We anticipate that increasing significantly due to various residential build-outs, so we'll have additional financial flexibility to address water main improvements that need to be done to the water system. The primary focus right now is spending down the bond proceeds for the 2 new wells and the water tower that was issued back in 2017, so those projects are moving along. We do have some increases in operating costs, replacement of treatment plant equipment, and various other things as these plants and various other items, mechanicals, age, and that is ongoing. Just a couple other notes on our vehicle equipment fund that continues to work very well for replacing vehicles and setting aside money. Also purchasing various other equipment related to IT or other infrastructure that wasn't anticipated. That's working out really good. We talked about police pension a little bit. Those contributions based on the actuary will be 1.167 million. We did decrease our police pension investment rate from assumed investment rate from 7% to 6.5%. Which is much more in line with what the actuary has recommended. It's been a little bit of a challenging investment environment. During calendar 18, we've had some negative overall investment returns, but we're starting to see that pick back up a little bit. But we are going to evaluate the potential for an additional contribution, just so that we can maintain and increase possibly our funded percentage in that fund currently at 61%. So I know that was a lot. I kind of went through it a little bit quickly, but if there's any questions, please let me know.
Good news. Good report.
No questions? Very good job, Bill. Thank you.
Very good job.
I see nothing else to come before us for the evening. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? We're out of here.
All right.